Good evening. I am sitting here in my living room after grading probably about 200 pages of student writing. So, after grading that much, I thought it was probably a good idea to show you guys some of the expectations for opinion writing in case you have any questions. This is a graphic organizer we use called a flea map. I did not create it. I can't take credit for this, but it works really, really well for students. Basically, it's a way for them to pre-write and organize their thoughts. So you'll see that the first thing we have up here is the hook and the thesis statement. You might also hear me call it a claim. I use those terms interchangeably in my classroom. The next things you'll see is we're talking about the reasons. Each of these reasons ends up turning into a paragraph. There's a space for students to start writing transitions. And then you will see we have our evidence. Notice that there's two numbers there. We have a place for students to put the source. And then we have our elaboration. A lot of this was gone over with kids in the class as well, so I just thought I'd show you what we did. A lot of kids get stuck on how to start that paper. Well, a lot of adults too get stuck on how to start that paper. And so we introduced something that we call a hook, which is a way to get your reader excited about what you're doing. A huge common thing that kids like to do is the question. I've kind of outlawed the question just because I want to see how creatively other kids can write. But before the question, because this is persuasive or opinion writing, I want the kids to come up with a claim. In this case, the writing prompt was basically asking, what is the most habitable place in space besides Earth? Now, the kids had done an informative essay in science, and so I wanted to continue their learning into ELA as well. And so they took some of their learning from science, and then they had to persuade me, the reader, and their classmates on which planet was the most habitable. This example that I used was the moon. We actually read several articles in class. I'll show you one, Astral Bodies and In Pictures Beyond Planet Earth, which gave us evidence. I just want to be able to support the students in their research as well. A lot of times when they go on Google to research, they just looked in the search bar and they don't really go into the article, so we're working on that too. Anyways, I digress. So the first thing basically that I tell kids is if you are stuck on a hook or a great way to bring your reader in, making the image or not, to just go ahead and jump right into your thesis or your claim. In this case, we made it simple. The most habitable place in space, in my opinion, is the moon. Now, I did caution kids that when you throw in terms like in my opinion or I think, it's not as strong. So really a better claim would probably be the most habitable place in space is the moon. It just sounds more confident. Then we decided after some discussion some of the reasons why the moon is the most habitable. And the reasons we thought were most logical and had the most evidence to back it up was that it is closest to Earth. It has been visited by people before, and technology exists for us to help. Now, I'm not expecting at this point for kids to write in full sentences because this is just them planning. A lot of times kids need some support in planning this, and that's why we use graphic organizers. So after reading some of our sources, you'll see here in Pictures Beyond Planet Earth, that was one of these two sources that I gave to them. You will see that I pulled some evidence from the source. The first piece of evidence that I pulled was that scientists are discussing putting in a lunar elevator. The kids thought that was really exciting, and so we decided to put that in there. Now, the important thing to notice, and the reason that I color-coded this too in front of the students, is because every time we put in a piece of evidence, we want to make sure that we elaborate or explain those facts. Now, students are getting really good about putting in evidence, but when it gets to their writing, I'm not seeing as much of the explanation or elaboration. So here they're explaining why is it important. So why would you put in a lunar elevator? And you'll see here because it is close, and it's easier to transport supplies. One of the things that we discussed is if people go to Mars, it takes 3 years to get to Mars, whereas the moon is about 3 days. So if people get sick or need antibiotics or medications, the moon is so much closer to be able to get those important supplies to. The next, you'll see our next reason here. It has been visited by people before. People went in 1972. Of course, we're talking about Neil Armstrong. And our elaboration for that piece of why that's important is we want our reader to think about how much better our technology is now. So if in 1972 the technology existed for us to go on the moon, with the newest technology, it would be even easier. So once students gather their evidence, which supports their reason, the next thing they'll look for is transitions. And in class, we have come up with lists of transitions. I've also banned first, next, and last. I prefer that kids use things to start with, for example, to explain. All of those are pieces of transitions that I'm looking for from the kids. Finally, what I like them to do is we talk about restating the thesis and coming up with a global connection. A global connection is just tying it to the reader. So it might be something as simple as, so if Earth becomes overpopulated and we need to look for an alternative place to sustain life, look no further than Earth's own moon, or something along those lines. So I hope this helps. Oh, and the last thing, is we want to make sure that they go back then and they can do a hook. A good hook could be setting the scene, setting the stage, telling a story, giving a description. One thing we talked about in class was the Earth's population is increasing every single day. There are millions of people. Do we have the supplies to be able to sustain them, or do we need to look for further places to inhabit? Look no further, we have the moon, or something like that. And of course, this is just the pre-write, so we're always going to fix it, and it is okay that it is messy. I hope this helped you. Have a good evening. Thank you. Bye.